Hey everyone, yeah, I'm Dr. Dante Barksdale. So what do? I teach the African American Studies classes here, African American History, I should say. I teach the other minoritized histories, cover Africa, Latin America, Mexico, kind of all the non-white parts of the world. So what do I do for fun? I travel, I read, I do lots of things like that. I'm in Sacramento less than I probably should be, but it's a nice thing to get out of here, right? I grew up in the region, right? So I'm just from Modesto, and I was there from birth till 23. I went to CSU Stanislaus in Turlock for my undergrad. There I was a history and a Spanish major, eventually dropped down to Spanish minor, but did all that, which I liked. I always wanted to be a history professor, but what the history I would study was kind of changing forever. When I started college, I was a Russian history professor, which would be fun, but there's no Russians in Turlock and there's no Russian history classes in Turlock. So kind of had to pivot there a little bit. My undergrad advisor, Dr. Marjorie Sanchez Walker, was awesome. She was this older leftist lady who looked a lot like Jessica Walter, Mallory from Archer, if we've seen that show. And she was a Latin Americanist, right? So I took some classes with her, kind of got a bond there. And I did an early research paper on Haiti, Haitian Revolution, which will eventually, after many years and iterations, be what my doctoral work was on. But she told me something that was very useful. Was if I wanted a job, I had to focus on things that aren't like white people. For better or worse, it was a real thing, right? With all the kind of push now to diversify histories, do all those things, it really helped me kind of guide my path. So what led me to teach Black history was also kind of a navigating road. I didn't have my first Black, U.S. African-American Black history class until my graduate program at Sac State. I moved up here for grad school for Sac State and then for Davis for my PhD. And it was there that I finally got into the classes. They just were not, if they were offered in my undergrad, I never noticed them or took them. So I kind of got into it in history. In Sac State, I kind of looked at my family's history. They moved from Alabama to Michigan to California with the Great Migration in the 1950s and 60s. So I did that for my master's project to kind of get into the field there, and that kind of blossomed everywhere in a really fun way. Worked out well for the master's program, and then I kind of took the Blackness, the revolutionness, the anti-colonialism that I kind of liked and had pieced together through all these different classes. My minor field at Sac State was African decolonization. So kind of combined all those to the Haitian Revolution. And that's what got me through my PhD, where while I was there, I worked a lot with the African American Studies department. So I have a designated emphasis. That's how I teach ethnic studies here at Los Rios. The personal experiences for history of knowing about my dad's family. My parents divorced when I was little. I lived with my mom. I'm biracial. My mom's side is white. So I knew of my dad's family, right? I saw them at holidays and stuff. I knew kind of where they moved from and things, but was much more in tune with my mom's family just because of life, right? So that's what kind of triggered that first interest into Blackness, Black studies, African American history, and the lovely snowball that created. My grandparents were born on sharecroppers in Mississippi or Alabama, I forget which one. But I said that in a history class in junior high in Modesto, or not junior high, in my junior year of high school in Modesto. So yeah, they were born on a plantation, they were sharecroppers. And my teacher was like, no, you're wrong. That wasn't a plantation. Plantations have to have slaves. That's not how the economic system of a plantation works, right? It's a farm that produces things for export. So that was just kind of a weird thing I wasn't really seen in. And I was the only Black kid in my class in AP US history. So it's kind of little things like that. I didn't see myself in a lot of them. So I hope students can get something from the classes that way, regardless of racial heritage, right?
What are your main goals when teaching Black history or minority history?
My main goals when teaching those histories, and it's the same for either one, right? I teach mostly Black history, but I do teach the other ones as well, is to, one, have students, ideally, my main goal in teaching is for them to come away with something they didn't know before, right? Generally, at least when I grew up, it's probably, hopefully changing now, was kind of a very whitewashed history. Not everyone was there. So to know that we're all humans in this country, right? You want to be seen in some way. When I teach the specific history, they try to cater it to those demographics, but that's one thing I didn't get a lot growing up. So the main goal is to kind of see those voices represented, also for them to learn things they didn't know before and come away with something they'll remember well.
how do you handle difficult or uncomfortable topics in class?
I have luckily never had a lot of pushback in my classroom against students. I know certain professors have when uncomfortable things come up, because by definition they're uncomfortable, right? I think one way to do it is do it through objectivity and through the facts, right? Awful things have happened. Redlining is awful, right? Japanese internment is awful. Slavery is awful, right? These are not moral judgments against people now. It is just more looking at things that have happened and understanding how they got there, why they happened, and how people responded afterwards to be able to hopefully prevent them in the future, to understand that they are bad and that we have to move on, hopefully positively altogether there.
Do you think certain topics are avoided or censored?
So I don't think I know they are, just as a fact, right? There have been a lot of pushbacks against teaching non-patriotic American story, right? America can't look bad, which gets rid of a lot of stories. Every country has done bad things. That's just a fact of life, right? Sweeping under a rug does not help anything. Last year, right, Trump had his thing with the National African American History Museum, the Smithsonian, right? He wanted to cancel it. He wanted to have someone come in and revise it because it focused on slavery and made people feel bad, but slavery is a part of this history's country, right? We've had the Texas and the Florida governments, censor or cancel Black history classes, revising them, using alternate language to make things seem more rosy and more happy than they are. And that is a huge disservice to everyone, right? Censorship is never good, right? So I know the current, even the purge on DEI, that's just a huge push against including people of color in the narrative. If we don't teach these stories, it is, I think, a very easy way to justify some of the negative feelings people have. Avoiding those topics, censoring them, having those gaps or misconceptions about the origins of certain things is in some ways intentional by certain people in power, but also is a detriment to everyone, right? Because it reinforces things that are not true because people don't know that they are manufactured to think that.
So how do you think that the limited representation affects students in that way, or especially students of color?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, right? I think it hinders them by just not seeing themselves in that story, right? We're all Americans. Everyone who lives in this country is an American, right? And the story of America is not the story of Andrew Jackson and Donald Trump and JFK, right? These are everyday people, millions of us who have done it. And limiting that does impact them because it does prevent students, especially students of color, to see themselves in this narrative. Right? In the 1950s, we had Leave It to Beaver and I Love Lucy and all these really white, happy Americana things. So for the whole 1950s, you don't see yourself in color. You're self-represented many times, right? It's not till the 60s, 70s, and 80s we get minoritized TV shows. Even just on media and TV that way, culturally is good. But you also have to see yourself in the story academically, right?
How can teaching history reflect the complexity of identity?
I think it can do it very well by just grounding everything there. There's a lot of pushback right now that, back in my day, gay people didn't exist, right? Like trans is some new identity people have created. It's not a case, right? These people have been around forever, right? I'm queer, I'm Black, that's intersectionality. And all these things have been around forever by creating a narrative where these are newfangled things that have happened, right? Queer people have always existed, people of color have always existed for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And I think teaching history just to ground that in the past and show that it is real is a thing, right? We have organizations in the 50s and 60s, the Daughters of Bilitis, the lesbian organization, the Mattachine Society for Gay Rights. You go back to the Harlem Renaissance, that was wonderfully queer in every possible way, right? Most of the leaders, Langston Hughes, other ones, are queer people of color. So this didn't just get created in the 80s. These have been here forever. We have the first known Black drag queen in the 1880s in DC. Former slave named Joseph Swan, right? These are wonderful stories that I think will help people understand that these things have always been here. If we go back into world history outside the US, the same thing happens, right? We have the Kama Sutra, right? Has all different sexualities in the book. Sexualities of Southeast Asia, of China, of Africa, they all exist here. And teaching history, regardless of the history, right? I teach mostly US based, but any of these histories will and should explore these things because they are part of history.
Why is it important for students to understand multiple perspectives and overlapping identities?
No one's one perspective is right? I have my perspective of 35-year-old black queer man in Sacramento, not San Francisco, right? Sorry, Freudian. Right, that's very different than even your perspective, right? As a college student, I've graduated. It's different than a perspective of an immigrant child. It's different than my grandparents who grew up in the 40s, right? So all these overlapping things exist to create who we are, and just having your one blinders on will hinder that kind of understanding and commonality of humanity.
In what ways can teaching Black history be a form of resistance or challenging dominant narratives? What does it mean to refuse incomplete or inaccurate versions of history in education?
I mean, teaching it is just a form of resistance in itself, right? Like if we go back to the 60s, the creation of the Third World Liberation Front, from there we get the protest movements in the Bay Area, right? That's how we get, for the most part, African American studies, Native American studies, all these things descend from that like protest in the 60s, which comes out of the civil rights movement from early generations of people's stories not being told. So by the very existence of it, it is protest and pushing back on the white dominant great white man theory of history that George Washington solved all the issues, right? We can know all these things. That's not a case. But that in its very existence is resistance and protesting, right? It's challenging it. We've heard the saying that history is written by the victors, right? So the victors have a story they are telling, a dominant narrative they want. So refusing that will open it up, give more connection and more aspects, but also just by definition include more people that the whatever dominant narrative it is are excluding for a reason.
How can students and teachers push against limited or biased curriculum?
Go to the library. That's my example there. Reading, right? By definition, will expand these things, right? I can't cover everything I would love to cover in my class. We've got 16 weeks. But really, just reading books that were published, primary sources, secondary sources. There's a million books in here. And librarians, right? They're awesome people, right? That I think is one really clear way. I think we are, no, I don't think, I know we're on a kind of a reading decline in this country. People are reading less than they used to. And I think one way to kind of counter a lot of the fuckery, a lot of the shenanigans of right now, I don't know if you'll have cussing in this.
Oh, we do.
A lot of that I think could be pushed back by just reading and engaging with other material that would open people's viewpoints. Reading more and doing that is pushing back against biased curricula that comes up.
If you could redesign the curriculum, what would it look like? What specific topics or perspectives should add it to the curriculum?
Yeah. If I could redesign this, we would have to break up history classes a little more. I really do think it's a disservice for like just the two-parter. I know no one can take 3 classes. There's, guidelines we want to meet. Students need to transfer in things, but especially Black history, like up to the Civil War to World War II, and then we have civil rights to the present. Like, those could be like 3 awesome individual classes, I think. But perspectives, I want to see more gay things in education, right? I want to focus, I do some in like Harlem Renaissance and stuff, right? But that would be something I think that'd be really cool to look at. Differing sexualities, different gender expressions, those ways to look at it. I would really like to have more ways to engage students, right? Just not me rambling, right? I need to figure this out, but just different ways to get you all involved, right? To get you guys to care a lot more, to kind of have the weird, nerdy history passion that I have, that not everyone does, right? But if I could just like give all of you some of my history passion for a day, I would really like that. But that would involve some weird, brain transfer machine that doesn't exist.
Is there anything you think people often misunderstand about Black history education? And what advice would you give students who want to learn more about Black or minority history outside the classroom?
Yeah. Good, excellent questions to wrap up on. I'll kind of do them in reverse order there. The advice I'd give to students, right? Libraries, go to libraries. But also, like, there's other things that are around. Not everyone has the ability to travel and everything, but there's a lot of historical sites everywhere, right? If anyone's driving down the freeway, going to LA, right? Allensworth is there. It was the first free Black town, all Black town founded in California in the early 1900s. African American History Museum. There's a bunch of stuff that's even just local that is just even placards, right? If you walk down Midtown, there are placards for like the first Black AME church in town. So you can see outside the classroom, whether it's reading, whether it's documentaries, whether it's music, whatever it is. There's a lot of stuff you can just kind of see there, right? Like Black people came to California when it was founded in the 1700s by Europeans, right? And it's always been there, but those aren't always told stories. So just kind of getting out, seeing them, reading. That's the advice there to learn more, right? That's how we all learn. Talking to people, elder people, people above our generation have a lot of stories, right? Like if I could talk to my dad or my grandma about their experiences, that'd be a way to learn. And that kind of gets into the first part of the question of there's a lot of misunderstanding about Black history education. A lot of it is generally focused on like slavery, right? We think of cotton, we think of slavery, we think of the South as bad, the North as good. All of those are somewhat true, somewhat not, right? There were slaves in the North, there were slaves in the South, all this stuff. But there's so much more to just the sadness, to the horror, to the abuse, all those things, right? Went from slavery to Civil War to Reconstruction to Jim Crow to now. Just earlier this week we covered, right, they're rescinding the Voting Rights Act, right? That the story could be a story of perpetual sadness and abuse and anger, but there's so much more to it too. Symbols of resistance, right? African Americans in the slavery times doing whatever they could, finding joy, right? Having kids. It could be very scary, right, to be a slave, to know that your kid might be sold away or your spouse might or something. But choosing those things to have happiness and joy as you do, right? Resistance, as you said, like putting the maps in the cornrows and the braids on people's hair, right, to help other ones kind of subterfugely, that's a word, have signs of resistance that would not be noticed by those in power, right, who would be very opposed to runaway maps people had, the freedom and joy of just emancipation later on, right? I love the Harlem Renaissance. That's a huge explosion of African-American joy there. But that Harlem gets the lion's share of attention there, right? But there was Black Wall Street, there was Bronzeville in Chicago, right? There was the U area in DC. All these other neighborhoods had these symbols of cultural joy and happiness and expression and art. We kind of focus on the biggest stories because those are the ones we have to teach, right? Because it's be very hard to talk about everything that happens. I think that does give people examples and stories to look to, but it is often misunderstood that these might be the outlier and the reasons why people do things. Like, right, the Black Panthers we covered in class recently, like they're there for self-protection. There's still police violence issues with the Black community, other minority communities, but they also addressed issues, right? They had the free lunch program, the free breakfast program became the free lunch, free food program. There were people who could not go to doctors in the 60s, right? They now create health clinics, right, for free health care for African Americans. So a lot of the misunderstanding is that it's a story of sadness and anger, and not looking at all the benefits or looking at the reasons why people create things, which is usually to improve themselves, to improve their neighbors, their families, the community at large in ways that are openly defying the status quo, right? There's a reason the police pushed back on the free breakfast program for kids, but now most schools have a free program for kids in many places, right? So it's kind of the genesis of a lot of these good things that have happened. Jazz, free breakfast, all these things happen with the Black community. And if we just look at slavery, Jim Crow, sadness, you don't see that part of the story. An example I'll give, of things to read, things that are misunderstood, right, is Warriors Don't Cry, little lovely plug here for a book, because I think that is a personal account, right? History is often told in kind of abstract. These happened to people back then, right? But people were always people then. So reading sources like this, right, that it is sad, right? She's a 15-year-old girl. She is being abused. She's being bullied. She's being verbally assaulted every day, right? They have to call the National Guard. But if you read it, like the story of her and her family is just beautiful, right? Her and Link, the guy who's helping her through all this, right? Danny, the National Guardsmen who are there. These are all real stories of people being good, right? So the story of, yes, these teenagers being assaulted, being horrified, being abused for the betterment of society, right? Because they had to integrate somehow, does show like the humanity and goodness of people, right? So that's one thing that's often misunderstood. It's never been a one or the other case. It's not a binary, right? It's not black or white. That's the story they're often told, right? But that is not the story, right? Black people have done these things. They're the crux of it, but there has been support. There's been assistance. There's been just basic decency from other people in the country that is often kind of underplayed.
Thank you, Professor Barksdale, for your time, for this interview. Mm-hmm. And last thing you want to say to the students?
Well, my pleasure. Thanks for interviewing me. It's been fun. All of you take history classes, especially Black history classes. I teach wonderful ones at Sac City. I know Los Rios is all connected, so you can visit me whenever you want. And that's what I'll say there. Stay in college, do classes. They're fun. And read. Go to a library.